To abbreviate the rapid response paramedic to the responder. So what is a rapid response paramedic? An experienced specialist paramedic that works on their own. They are smaller and faster, so they can weave through traffic. In a life-threatening situation, both the ambulance and a responder will go out to the same job, and the aim of the responder is to be able to get there before the larger vehicle to start emergency treatment. They can establish patient history and make decisions, but can't always take a patient to hospital because their vehicle might be inappropriate. However, they can prevent a patient going to hospital as they can diagnose and administer drugs. Responders aren't necessary in all areas, but they can be beneficial in busy cities, at events to move through large crowds, or at like a natural disaster. They can also attend minor incidents to free up ambulance time. So, for example, if a patient needs some dressings or like some stitches, they can do that. But because of the nature of their job role, they mostly attend life-threatening situations. In the emergency seconds count, responders have an 8-minute target to reach a patient. We can cancel an ambulance if necessary so it can be utilised elsewhere, or that once the ambulance arrives they can go off to another patient themselves. Figure 4 shows the amount of calls responded to within the 8-minute target between 2008 and 2016 by urgency category. So 90% of major calls were visited within the target, and then it was 89% of minors, and then 69% of fatals. Figure 5 shows the amount of specialist paramedics in the North West Ambulance Service, and it's only 1%. The use of a multidisciplinary team is important for patient benefit, as professionals who share similar knowledge and background can give their perspective for the best possible treatment of a patient. Responders will tend to a patient for absolutely anything and have an overview of the whole care system. They bridge the gap between the acute trust and the community trust. They will also work closely with the police and fire services in road accidents, or nursing home staff for the elderly who are at high risk of falls, or when they make a referral to like on-call doctors, GPs, the palliative team. These are key professionals responders will be working with as they are always on the road. The emergency medical dispatcher is possibly the most important, as they prioritise incidents and send the rapid responder to different jobs. So if you think of an ambulance a bit like your mobile phone, when you put it on airplane mode, nothing will come through. But then when the ambulance notifies the EMD that they're available again, all the jobs start coming through, and they can change depending on like how urgent they are as they're driving. And similarly, the responder can report back to the emergency medical dispatcher to either send an ambulance or cancel it. If an ambulance is necessary, the responder will give a handover to the ambulance staff, like the ambulance paramedic and the emergency medical technician. How rapid response has evolved. Before the paramedic came the ambulance. Towards the end of the First World War, soldiers made use of stretchers and wheels to remove the wounded. This inspired the horse-drawn ambulance in 1912. Later in 1937, they developed the 999 telephone number, and the NHS was born in 1948. The horse was a bit slow, so in 1959 the first motor vehicle was used, and they were known as rescue response trucks. And later that year they were fitted with blue lights and sirens. At this point, patients weren't treated on the scene. The purpose of the vehicle was just to take them to an infirmary. And then later, in 1972, control rooms were created to minimise the communication chain. And then finally, in 1988, student paramedics were brought in who learned on the job. So in the 21st century, the ambulance service has advanced its facilities, technology, and its multidisciplinary team. There is no longer just one job role within the ambulance service. You now have the emergency medical dispatcher, the ambulance care assistant, and volunteers. And an ambulance paramedic can now advance to specialist paramedics like a rapid responder. Instead of just acting as a transport service, the ambulance now also aims to treat people on the scene or in the specialist vehicle on the way to a facility. We now also have the air ambulance, we have water rescue, we have coast guards, and mountain rescue teams. Responders determine different pathways for patients who aim to prevent hospital admission. So a regular ambulance will go to a site of an incident, and they will either they make the decision whether an ambulance they need to go to the hospital or not. Whereas the rapid responder is sent ahead of the ambulance to start performing treatments such as drug administration, dressing wounds, start CPR, or even treating blood loss. But if the patient does need to go to A&E, they hand over verbally and in writing to the rapid response paramedic and the ambulance. Figure 21 shows referrals made for the elderly. in 2016, and 3/4 were referred to further medical facilities. Maintaining professional boundaries. An appropriate yet effective interaction between the professional and the public. Responders need to be particularly aware of professional boundaries as they tend to patients on their own. The role can involve being up close and personal with patients, so it's important to find a therapeutic relationship, so the right balance between neglect and over-involvement. Or getting consent before touching a patient, but if the patient doesn't have capacity, explaining what they're doing in treatment as they do it to reassure them a little bit. Training and looking for warning signs of a situation can avoid violation of professional boundaries. Boundary violation is a behaviour that damages the patient or the professional, often caused by confusion between the responder and those of the patient. So you wouldn't interact in the same way with the patient as you would with your friends, and similarly you wouldn't interact with your friends the same way you would with your colleagues, would you? Examples of crossing professional boundaries include disclosure of information about a professional's personal life, sexual misconduct that could be interpreted as harassment, secretive behaviour or special treatment. Ethics. In the nature of the rapid responder, ethics can sometimes be questioned because it's quite literally life or death. Autonomy. The responder must respect the decisions of every patient, for example, allowing them to walk if it's safe and they're capable rather than just putting them in a wheelchair for ease. Non-malefiance. A patient definitely shouldn't be caused any harm by the responder, so imagine you're the first on the scene and the patient begs you for pain relief, but you don't know any kind of allergies they might have. Beneficence. To minimise the risk and maximise benefit. This can conflict with autonomy because the patient's idea may not be the same as yours, the professional, and you want to use a blood pressure cuff on your patient, but you're unsure if it was sterilised after the last patient. And then finally, justice, implementing legislation into the responder's way of working. So you could perform CPR on your patient, but they have Parkinson's and would be palliative anyway, so do you go ahead? Legislation. Every aspect of the responder's role is fast-paced and unpredictable. However, they still need to work within legislation. The Traffic Management Act 2004 was amended to permit ambulances to go through red lights, exceed speed limits, and cut through traffic. Responders may find themselves on the wrong side of civil law when it comes to health and safety, clinical negligence, road accidents, or discrimination. Sometimes, if a patient in a responder's care dies, it will be followed up by a coroner who identifies the deceased, place and time of death, and how they died. And it is the responder's duty by law to provide this information. The HCPC is an official regulator of healthcare professionals that need to meet the correct standards for the particular role. Its purpose is to protect the public against unqualified and unofficial individuals. To gain employment as a responder, one must be registered with HCPC, who set the standards for the educators and the practice that produce the paramedic and therefore the responder. Workplace policies are important because they clarify standards expected of employees. Policies mean every employee will work towards the same standard and give a clear definition of acceptable and unacceptable. These are categories different policies that are put in place by the South Central Ambulance Service along here. So the corporate includes the driving policy, clinical includes the stroke care policy, operational includes the water policy, and lots more that you can see in your handout. The Trust also carries out assessments to evaluate each policy. Beginning of the 21st century, where ambulance trusts grew, more money was invested to vary the ambulance service and improve it, like ensuring emergency vehicles were automatic, had built-in sat-navs and cameras to help them park quickly, and then fitting bikes with blue lights so responders could get through patients quicker. And equipping them with a machine that read like the blood pressure, oxygen saturation, temperature, blood sugar, heart rate, and did an ECG all in one, because they have to carry their equipment about. Politics. However, now paramedics are expected to work 12-hour shifts, treating up to 15 patients per shift. This exceeds the amount of staff. Going up to 7 hours without a break is considered the norm. So they set aside things like eating and going to the toilet. In the UK, we are short of paramedics by 10% and specialists by 30%. With 1 in 20 people calling 999 every day, there is a huge amount of pressure put on the ambulance staff, especially with the new 8-minute target. They end up stuck outside the hospital with a patient who they won't have a bed for. This is driving staff to poor mental and physical health and results in them leaving the trust. The service isn't taking on new vehicles, but instead taking on less qualified individuals like the ambulance care assistant, because they're cheaper to employ. What is the difference between a paramedic and a rapid responder? For this survey, I had 60 responses, and 20% of people said they didn't know, but 47% of people knew they travelled in smaller vehicles. Another question I had on this survey was, has anyone been under the care of a responder? And 63% said yes. Figure 31 shows 50% of people thought a paramedic can advance to rapid response through an internship route rather than gaining a degree. Figure 32 shows the amount of people who thought that you can be of service for, and it was the exact same amount that thought opposite ends. So 12% of people thought you should either be of service from 1 to 4 years or 30 or more years. And then finally, figure 33 shows 48% of people thought one would choose to be a responder because the community need them, followed by selflessness at 35%. No one thought anyone did it because it was fun. Another question in my survey was, would you expect a responder to be male or female? And everybody said either. And you can look at the other results I have from my survey in the handout. My survey results show that the public see different forms of ambulances out at least once a day, yet responders are portrayed as unexpected victims. Even though they are there to help a patient, they are victims of verbal abuse, threats, violence, and even being spat at. Similarly, finding threatening notes hit to their vehicles about parking and even parking tickets. The public do not seem to have a lot of respect for the ambulance staff. However, other news reports praise the heroism of responders who go above and beyond, including one individual who saved the lives of 5 people in a car accident while he was off duty. He is clearly very well respected because he won an award. You can view this article and others from the slide in your handout. So overall, the public need and honour the work of the emergency services like the ambulance. However, the media like to exaggerate what the minority think of the paramedic. So I know most of you did my survey, but now, would you know the difference between a paramedic and a rapid response paramedic?
Yes.
That's happy. Any questions?